public school. Hold on. At my high school, we had 3 choruses, 2 bands, we had an orchestra, and we had a composer in residence who happened to be Peter Shickley. That's a public high school back then. And this kind of stuff has been forgotten. And I guess what made it really impressive was that lots of schools valued and understood the importance, not just of music, but of arts education and what it contributes. Even if no one went into a profession in the arts, the value for what it stands for and what it can do for individuals. So I'm afraid it's all changed. One of the things I tried to do in my lifetime was to make it perhaps something that should go back onto the agendas. When I was in Washington, D.C. as the music director, I had several meetings with Hillary Clinton, and we had all kinds of plans in place for actually making awareness of the importance of arts education. But of course, that all went away.
All right, nice little connection there. So I have several questions compiled from my students here at the university, the Wind Ensemble, La Sierra, and of course, some of my colleagues also have a few questions. So I'll try my best to get through some of them, and we'll see where we head with this. One thing I noticed is that you have a CD coming out.
Yeah.
I believe next month.
February 11th.
Yeah, Slatkin on Slatkin.
Slatkin.
Yeah.
Slatkin conducts Slatkin.
I think well, do you mind talking about the recording a little bit? I know that we'll find out about your family a little bit through this conversation.
This one is obviously very personal. It is called that because there are 3 generations of Slatkins represented, plus some other peripheral members of my family. What is helpful for those of you who don't know is that my father was a very distinguished musician out in Hollywood, as was my mother. So my dad was the concertmaster of the orchestra at 20th Century Fox. He was the conductor of the Hollywood Bowl. He was the founder and lead violinist for the Hollywood String Quartet. My mother was the first cellist in the quartet. She was also the principal cellist at Warner Brothers, the first woman to ever hold a title position in the studios. Her family actually had all the musicians in it. My father was the first on his side. I have a brother who, for more than 50 years, was the principal cellist in the New York City Ballet Orchestra. He just retired this year. I think it was one nutcracker too many. And all through my life, a side part was always interested in the creative side. Remember, as performing musicians, we are recreators. We take what already exists, try to make it something valuable for our time, for listeners today, but we didn't write it. We may make changes, notes, dynamics, things like that, but still somebody else wrote it. I think it's vital that everybody who's a performer at least take a shot at writing something. It doesn't have to be very good. It doesn't matter. It's the idea of creating something that was not there before. So I've been doing that all my life. And when I turned 75, I'm 77 and a half now, there was a celebration of that birthday at the Manhattan School of Music. And rather than just kind of make it a tribute to me, I decided it would be more fun to include as much of my family as I could. So for that concert, we did some arrangements made by my father. My brother played as a soloist on the concert, and we had one of my early compositions from 1971 based on Edgar Allan Poe, 5 poems. It's almost a half hour long. Raven is the title of the work. It's for narrator and orchestra. It actually gets played every so often by other conductors and narrators. The original narrator was an actor named Vincent Price, who was from St. Louis, extraordinary actor, especially in horror films. And for this recording and the performance in New York, it was Alec Baldwin. Now, I know he's going through a very difficult time right now. I can't even imagine what it must be like, the the stress, the strain on the family. But he's brilliant in this. You may not know that he's an avid lover of classical music. He's the radio voice for the New York Philharmonic. So we recorded the concert, and then we had this idea that could we make an album out of some of it? Well, the company, Noxus, didn't want to just take that concert. They thought it was too many loose ends. So what we did was we culled the archive from the Detroit Symphony in particular, and included two other compositions, a little bit more recent. One is Endgames, which is for woodwind sextet and string orchestra, but the instruments that are the soloists are not the usual ones. You'll be interested in this as wind ensemble folks. The soloists are a piccolo, alto flute, English horn, E-flat clarinet, bass clarinet, and contrabassoon. The instruments in an orchestra that sit on the ends, so end games. And it's a lot of fun. And near the end, there's some quotes from famous excerpts that those players usually get to play. But the real interesting thing about the piece for me was that I could put the six players in a semicircle around me, meaning musicians who really never ever sat next to each other they were there. And I could also create some unusual sonorities because of the proximity of each musician to each other. And then the other work of mine on the album is called Kina, and it's an elegy in memory of my parents. You can find it. It's, I think, quite a nice piece. There is these arrangements by my father. He was also known in the last part of his he died when he was 47. I was 19. He made arrangements for a record company called Liberty Records, and they were just incredibly clever. And even though most of the music, the physical music, doesn't exist now, my wife has been transcribing some of them and taking them down from the discs, recreating them, and fleshing them out for fuller forces. So that's on there. There are a couple of cuts from the 1940s, one featuring my father as a violinist playing with the, what was called, you ready for this name? The Army Air Force Training Command Orchestra, which was based in Santa Ana. And then there's an excerpt of my mother playing part of the D major Haydn cello concerto. And the other reason that makes this album very special is that the next generation of Slatkins is there too, because it features a work by my son, who is 27, living out in the Valley in LA and writing music for film and television. But he wrote a piece in honor of my departure from Detroit at the farewell concert. I didn't know it was going to happen. I just sat there in the box, and all of a sudden it was announced that my son not only was going to have his piece played, but he was going to conduct it as well. I didn't remember how the piece went because I was too busy crying. So I decided the only way I'll know this is to program it and then record it. So this album comes out. I'm very, very proud of it. And it feels like a culmination. If I'd ever make another record a year, and I'm just fine with that.
That's exciting. Congratulations. So colleague of mine just sent me a picture. I'll send you. It's a record of the Hollywood String Quartet, and your mother signs it for our department.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Was she out there at some point?
Yeah, I'll send it to you because I'm not smart
Thank you.
to put it on the screen.
Oh,
Yeah, Gio, actually, I just wanted to say
that's not my mother.
Yeah, Maestro, there was a donation made to our university of a record collection by Dan and Arlene Levitt.
Mhm.
And in going through these records, we came across a photo that was signed by featuring your parents. So,
Isn't that nice? Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I'll send that to you. So
Great.
you had quite the Hollywood music upbringing. And I saw on your website that you have a connection to several stars, but I think it'd be interesting to, if you could tell us about your connection to Frank Sinatra. I know that you knew this was coming.
Oh yeah, and I'm, I have no problem with it. Well, when Frank Sinatra switched labels, he went from Columbia Records to Capitol in the mid 1950s. He already knew a little bit about my parents, who almost always were the concertmaster and first cellist on pop sessions. So Capitol was boasting some really amazing artists. Some of the names will be familiar to some of you, others not. Nat King Cole, George Shearing, Nancy Wilson, Dean Martin, and of course, Frank Sinatra, we went over. Sinatra had as his arranger at the time a man named Nelson Riddle, who's a great arranger. I mean, really one of the very best, but he was a horrible conductor. They didn't get through very much at the sessions. So not only would my father act as concertmaster, often he would wind up conducting in place of Riddle. My father and mother became very close to him, and hence the family. So Sinatra was at our house quite often when I was very young. We were always allowed to call him Uncle Frank. Sometimes if he was over for dinner, when we were finished and whatever it is we had to do took place, he would take us by the hand and take my brother and I upstairs, tuck us in and sing us to sleep. There were no micro cassette recorders back then. It's too bad. Eventually, he wound up doing an album with the string quartet, as I mentioned, the Hollywood String Quartet, and he founded Reprise Records, but asked my father to be one of the co-founders, which my dad did, and they worked at Reprise for a year before my father went over to Liberty Records. I found him to be extraordinarily nice. If you were a friend of Sinatra's, you couldn't ask for a better one, and if you were his enemy, you couldn't ask for a worse one.
That's funny. Awesome. I have some questions here from my students. And so the first one is from Caitlin Mamora. She's a junior pre-med student, plays clarinet. She wants to know if you've ever dealt with any imposter syndrome, or if you had students that you helped that had imposter syndrome.
I'm not sure I know what that is.
People that feel that they don't belong to a certain profession. Like you don't belong as a musician, maybe because of your parents or because of the pressures of the life.
Oh, okay. Well, I suppose I know of many examples of people who couldn't deal with the stress of live performance. Sometimes it's called stage fright. Is that sort of the idea here, or is it really something more inside where somebody says you're not good enough for this and you leave? So am I in the right category?
It's more of a feeling that you don't belong to the profession.
Even if you, is it a
feeling.
feeling or you realize you don't belong?
No, I think it's more of a feeling. So you could be the greatest conductor in the world and you still feel.
Well, conducting, look, music is a passion. Music is something like a calling, just like going to the priesthood would be, in something like that. If you have the desire and really want to go into it, you're going to overcome anything that feels like it's holding you back. You have to. That's part of the profession, because we are a very subjective field. That means what might seem wonderful to one person can be horrible to another. So the audition process is so difficult. You don't know what the people are thinking who you're playing for. It's impossible. So I can tell you something that maybe would help here. When I think I was 13 or 14, and I asked my dad if he got nervous, because everybody seemed to. In fact, one of the members of the original Hollywood String Quartet left simply because he felt he didn't belong in the group. And he did. But the level of the other three musicians, I guess, was too much pressure for him. So out he went. Anyway, my dad said, no, I practice, I study, I work hard, I go out and I try to do my very best. Most of the time it's good. Once in a while it doesn't quite work out, but it's not because I didn't succeed. I always want to be there, I want to be in that place. And then he said, but if you don't practice, if you don't work hard, if you're not prepared, not only should you be nervous, you shouldn't be on stage in the first place. That's tough. And I think for people who really want to enter the music profession, it has to be something that just a goal that you just fight for. It's interesting that this person who submitted the question, you said is a med student.
Yes.
It's interesting the juxtaposition. How many people actually may have started out in music and wind up in the medical profession? There's a whole orchestra out in Los Angeles, the Doctors Symphony Orchestra. My father used to conduct them. And this group, when they meet, they don't want to talk about what happened on the surgical theater. And I think here's the reason. There is a commonality between these two professions. In the music world or in the medical profession, your job is to keep people alive. In the music world, it's mostly about bringing things that have long passed back to life. Commonality is pulse. Pulse drives us towards this. So I guess the answer to the kind of question is, yes, I do see people who don't feel like they belong in the profession, even if they're talented. But that tells me, I guess, that maybe if they feel that way, maybe they shouldn't be in the profession and just keep music at the forefront as a sidelight. And maybe someday it'll reverse. Somebody comes up to you and says, you know, you really should continue in your pursuit of music if you believe in yourself enough.
Wonderful. Thank you. I have a question from Cassandra Ramos. She's a freshman psychology major and a flute player in the ensemble.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the old balance question, life balance. How do you manage or balance your personal and family life with your very busy career, or how have you done that in the past?
It took a long time for me to find what I now consider to be a balance. Everybody has a different way of handling it. It's interesting that you asked this. I just gotten a message from one of my former assistant conductors in Detroit, who just had her second child. And she's trying to figure out how will she balance her family with a career. Now, this doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. We all have to confront this. I don't consider myself, for example, to be a very good father. I wasn't there as much as I would like to be. Fortunately, my son and I now have a fantastic relationship. Everybody has to find their own way to this. People who are career driven often will neglect part of the family life. Other people like yourself who have two tracks going here eventually have to make a decision which one is going to be the main track to it. I know that when I was in the student world at the Juilliard School, it was music 24/7. I don't remember ever caring about anything else. Occasionally I go to the movies, might go down to 96th Street and play pool with Pinky Zuckerman. But it was so music focused. I kind of regret that I was not open to what the world was. I think today's young people have a better perception of what's going on in the world. And they need to, because they're going to be the ones who have to clean up the mess that my generation and the one that came after me have made. So balance, it's tough. You have to set out your own priorities and stick with it. Don't give in. If there's pressure from the outside to change the way you are, you never should go against the kind of person you are. And if your being says, I want to be a musician, you just have to pursue that and say, okay, I'm willing to sacrifice this as long as it's not harmful or hurtful to anybody, especially yourself.
Wonderful. On the same lines you mentioned Juilliard, one of my former students is asking if you can talk to us maybe about the most important lessons you learned during your schooling from your mentors or teachers.
When you're in a specialized school, again, it's primarily about the music. But while I was in school, I made a decision, I guess because I was brought up this way. You always accept what your teachers tell you. After you're finished studying with them, then you can reject it. But while you're with them, you want to take advantage of everything they offer, even if it goes against what you may think or feel. That it comes later when you get rid of that stuff. So I was very much a product of my two main conducting teachers. One was a Frenchman named Jean Morel, and the other, who I had in Aspen, was the Czech-born Walter Susskind. They were very opposite. So Morel was really about the technique, the using of your ears, being as clear as possible, score study, being able to truly understand how to read a score. Susskind was more about the practical element, the psychology of working with orchestras, what you had to do to achieve the best result through how your words made a difference, what you said, how the gestures can reflect that. But maybe the best piece of advice came a little later than I would have liked, but it's good to pass it on. And it goes in line with what I was talking about, and perhaps that early question about what if you don't feel comfortable in what you're doing. There was a fantastic, very in-depth conductor named Caro Maria Giulini. He was the principal guest conductor in Chicago. And from St. Louis, where I'm speaking to you from, because I live here now, I would fly up to Chicago, hear his program on Saturday, stay overnight. And then on Monday, they used to have a series of concerts in Milwaukee. And Giulini would be driven, and I would sit in the car with him. And he very rarely talked about music itself. He talked more about philosophy and literature and all kinds of things like that. And once he told me that when he was 50, he was in surgery. And they told him that it was possible that he might not recover from this. And then when he did, he said these words. He said, "From that point, I vowed to make music a part of my life and not make my life a part of music." In other words, there's more to life than just those notes. And you take your life experience and you inject that into your music making. And I've tried to do that now for the last 25, 30 years. In many ways, I was never career obsessed or oriented. I had my goals, my objectives, things I wanted to do. And for the most part, with a couple of hiccups along the way, I felt that I've been able to accomplish, in particular, being able to focus on composers from this country.
Wonderful. Great advice. Thank you so much. My student, Kelly Smith, he's a senior history major, wonderful percussionist. He's interested in how you manage ensemble rehearsals in locations where you may not speak the language very well.
Good question. The good thing, I suppose, is that no matter where you go, there are always musicians who speak English, always. The only language I felt comfortable in was French, although my German is passable enough. I can do a little in Spanish. But maybe one of the best stories I can tell you was on my first trip to Japan, conducting the NHK Symphony in Tokyo. One of my soloists was my dear, dear friend, Joseph Kallichstein, a pianist. And we'd known each other from our school days, and I asked to have him as one of my soloists. Now, at the NHK, at that time, there were a combination, mostly Japanese musicians, but some people came from Eastern European countries. They were still learning a lot about the repertoire, and it was interesting. But I always felt that no matter where I went, I needed to be able to say a few words or phrases in the language. I needed to be able to say, "Good morning, and ladies and gentlemen, it's nice to see you." And for the sake of rehearsal, really, it's a good idea to know the numbers and the letters in the language of the musicians. So you can say, we're going to start 6 before letter C or 6 before 25. So I knew this. I knew how to do it, and in Japanese as well. not very difficult. But I didn't tell Kallichstein. So we were doing third Prokofiev concerto. We play straight through it. And I said to Yossi, I said, before we go back to the beginning, do you mind if I do that transition from the moderato into the final allegro? He said, sure. And I told the orchestra in Japanese where we were going to start. And Kallichstein's look was like, you speak Japanese? And I'm really good at this kind of stuff. I went, yes, of course. Don't you learn the language before you come to a place? And then I said to the orchestra, we were going to start at the beginning in Japanese. Well, of course, this lasted for all of 35 seconds when he finally figured it out. But it was a lot of fun. I wouldn't worry about any language barriers, but a few words can make all the difference in the world in terms of your relationship with an orchestra that you don't know. There even to this day are orchestras I see that I haven't been to. Recently, I was in a couple of years ago in Antalya in Turkey. Now, I don't speak any Turkish, but it didn't seem to matter. It's not a problem.
Awesome. So Ricky Reyna is a graduate student of mine here at La Sierra, and he's actually also beginning his first year of teaching band at a school. And he just wants to know if you have any tips for him as he begins this journey in music education.
There is nothing, and I mean nothing, more noble than teaching. Some of my happiest moments have been when I felt I communicated something to young people that they can use in the future. More valuable than conducting the Berlin Philharmonic and the Bruckner Symphony. So I would say, show that enthusiasm, show the love for the music to the students, convey it that way, but never, ever talk down to them. Figure out where the level is. When you put your programs together and the pieces you're going to work on, go just one notch, one little notch above that level. Challenge the young people. Yeah, they'll get discouraged at first, but you're going to make them work. You're going to make them be better than they know they are. And again, the times have changed. In the past, it was possible to be a little more disciplined with students. These days, we're prohibited from doing certain things that we could do many, many years ago. I used to see teachers send young people crying out of rehearsals, and they were severely, well, you get the idea. And maybe that was okay back then, but it's not now. So it's an adjustment one has to make. There are times when I know I don't really have a temper per se, so it's not a problem for me. But I'm also used to a really interesting approach that I was brought up with in this kind of Russian school of music that my parents inherited and brought. And it was, if something is good, you don't need to say anything about it. You only speak about it if it's not good and needs to be corrected. So very rarely when I was a kid, when I was having my lessons or doing whatever, I very rarely heard a compliment. And even in Juilliard, my teacher there, Morel, in my fourth year, he never said anything positive about what I was doing. It was always a set of corrections and criticisms. And I did a performance with the Juilliard Orchestra of American in Paris. And I came off, I said, that actually was not bad. I need to go to Morel. He's got to say something good this time. So I went up to room 304 and he's sitting at the desk. He looks slightly up with a bit of Gaulois cigarette coming out of his mouth. And he says, "Oh, Slatkin, well, it was not bad." That was the highest compliment I got in 4 years. And I was, it was like that. So those days also are not there anymore, but just be positive, be supportive of your young people, but challenge them. That would be my advice.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Some questions here from my colleagues. The first one, actually, you might know him. I still consider him my teacher. Professor Reynolds is with us.
I saw that name out there. How nice of you to be on. It's, you're a legend. You're amazing. What you've done in the band community and for education in general has been so inspiring. So I thank you for that.
Well, he has his question would be, yeah, I feel the same. His question would be, it's simple, but actually may not be too simple. How did you become a conductor?
My whole family were musicians. My dad was a conductor, and I played in orchestras as a young person. I was a violist. I was terrible, but I was a violist. One day, when I was about 16, the conductor of the youth orchestra, which used to be called the California Junior Symphony, headed by a man named Peter Marenbloom, he was called away to the phone at a rehearsal, and he just literally looked down at me and the viola. He says, "You would like to conduct?" And I said, "I don't know." He said, "Here." And he threw the score down, Forza del Destino. And boom, I stood up and conducted. And I felt, hey, maybe I could do this. Then I started arranging the music for the high school shows. And that led me to arrange it to a point where I needed to conduct it as well. So I did that. And then it's complicated. The long story is in my first book, but it's important to know that when I was 19 and my father had died, I had returned from a highly unsuccessful stint as a student at Indiana University in composition. And then my father dies a couple months later, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I left music, and I really thought I would be an English teacher. And gradually people said, you need to get back into music. And here's the tough part. We were a very competitive household and family. Everybody's musicians, everybody was critical of each other. And I knew I would never be a good violinist, or certainly not as good as my father. I wouldn't be as good a pianist as my uncle was. Cello was out of the question because there were 4 generations of cellists in the family. Viola, at least I could play because nobody else did. And composition seemed like a decent thing, but I don't know. I didn't feel inspired back then. But gradually people said, you don't have to worry about your father anymore. He's not around. And your job now is maybe to carry on and go forward with what he might have wanted to do because his life was cut short. And that's how it really happened. So I applied to Juilliard as well as the Aspen School in the summer, got into both, and fortunately things worked out.
Lucky for us. Very, very.
Oh, and since you're all band folks, my first real conducting in high school was with the band. I used to do a lot of this stuff. I played, this is again, as a different sign of the times. So you're talking 1959, I guess. If you played in the band, you were exempt from going to phys ed because somehow they thought we were getting our exercise that way. And they didn't realize once football season was over, we were just a concert band. Nope, I never had to do rope climbing. I never had to do jumping jacks, none of that stuff. There were real advantages to being a musician. I played glockenspiel in the marching band. I was the tip of the L. And I remember just having to cross the 40-yard line, make a left, go 5 yards. That was me.
That's pretty funny. I guess keeping the humor going, and I'll let you tell the story, but I'm watching the Emmys, I think years ago. And actually, my wife is watching the Emmys to tell you the truth, because I don't really watch those shows. But I'm always interested in the section where they pay homage to those that have passed.
I will tell the story.
And then I see your picture, and I'll let you let you take it away from here.
Well, I didn't know anything. It was the Emmys. I was in Ireland. I'd been conducting in Dublin, but we had 10 days off. So when my wife and I were just touring around the country, I think we were in County Derry. And when I woke up on the Monday morning, there was a flood of emails asking, was I okay? And I went, what? And then I looked and I kind of figured it out that basically one of the people who had passed away was the remarkable Andre Previn. And when they announced him as being the person who was being memorialized here, my picture came up. And so uh, I had to figure out, I knew there were going to be all kinds of questions about this, and I had to prioritize because I didn't want to waste my tour time. So I was contacted by the Jimmy Kimmel show, and they asked if I could come on and talk about it. But there was a time difference. That show, by the way, is taped at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. No, it's not live. And they allow time for editing in there in case something goes wrong. So we set up things in the hotel room. It was like 2 something in the morning. And he asked me these questions. What was your first reaction? I said, well, my first one was, if people thought I was dead, why were they emailing me? Um, and then I said, no, I'm still here. I'm sad that Andre didn't get the kind of due and mention he should have. I remember holding up a newspaper proving that it was the real date and proving it was really me. Um, that's the old Mark Twain line. Rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated. The only way this is ever going to right itself is when my time comes, they put Andre's picture up there.
That's pretty hilarious. Okay. So I read in your book that you do not like to be, or one of your least favorite questions is, what is your favorite work to conduct? But we have a similar question, and it's, what's your favorite work for winds?
Ooh. Let me tell you a couple, I'll give you a couple choices here. The standards, of course. I've always loved doing the Sixth Persichetti Symphony when I get a chance. Hindemith Symphony, of course. I'll tell you, one of the most gratifying experiences I ever had was conducting the Marine Band in the Corigliano Third Symphony. That's the one that has the gunshot at the end, but it's tremendously difficult, but really such a satisfying experience. And on that same program, when we did it, they asked me if I would do the third piano concerto with Prokofiev. And I said, there's a band version of this? He said, yes, we have all of our arrangers and we'll do it. I said, well, okay, it'll be interesting. 2 things happened. One, I didn't miss the strings at all. Whoever this group was that did it was remarkable. I started investigating other transcriptions of things that I thought it's not possible, but they do an incredible job. I didn't realize that you could actually get a better sound. There's a device for the strings, it's called colegno. It's where you take the bow, you turn it upside down, and you tap the strings with the wooden part, but you still get a sort of pitch because you're fingering it, but you don't really hear the pitch clearly. So what they do in the band, I learned, you take the sticks, you turn them over, and you play with the ends of the sticks on the xylophone, and you hear the note very clearly, but you still get the wood sound. It's fabulous. I loved it. So I've always enjoyed my times working with bands and wind ensembles. I sort of met my wife, Cindy, because she was the head of the composition department at the University of North Texas, leading place for wind music. I became good friends with Gene Corporon, and we're hoping to do a couple projects in the future together. And who knows? The other thing about wind ensembles, it's great. You have so much more rehearsal time to put things together. The orchestra, we get 2, maybe a third day, maximum 18 hours. And that's not counting the break time. I write in the book several times, the clock is the enemy of the conductor. It's actually an enemy of most musicians in a group. But having to constantly stare at it to see if you're going to get everything done. But when I've had a chance to work with wind ensembles, at least for me, they're usually well prepared. Saves me a lot of time. I don't have to deal with technicalities, and I can get into the musical matters right away. So those are a couple of the pieces, but there's so much, it's such a rich repertoire. And I've wound up, by the way, starting to do some, I don't know if they're called orchestrations, if they're for band. Are they bandistrations? What do you call them?
I've never heard that.
Okay. Anyway, so I just finished up a group of Scarlatti keyboard sonatas, but just for winds. But I guess we would call it symphonic winds because there's no saxes or anything like that in it. It's just one of the things to do during the pandemic. So those were a lot of fun. I did some Brahms, a couple of those are for winds.
I saw the
So,
bronze.
yeah, there's two of them that are for winds. One is a very beautiful intermezzo, and the other is the D minor theme and variations, and they come out pretty well. I'm enjoying doing this.
with harp, correct?
Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you. I have another student question. Zach Flores, freshman, clinical health studies. He's a trumpet player in the band. And he asks, what kind of qualities do you hope to see and hear in performers when you work with them for the first time or more than once?
I think at this point in my life, because I bring a certain degree of experience to the field, no matter if it's band, orchestra, chamber pieces, I think the first thing I want is for people to come to the first rehearsal as prepared as possible individually. So I don't have to spend a lot of time just fixing the notes. I can work on ensemble, I can work on phrasing, all those kind of things. So that's the first thing. But the second thing, and I think that's important, I've started working now that I'm only a guest conductor with orchestras that I never saw before here in the States, orchestras that maybe don't have the big reputation, but I've learned that there is an enthusiasm, a kind of love of music, which inspires me, makes me a better conductor. So I look for that. I don't want to go so often to places where it's just a job and we're on the stage and we'll do our best. And that's about it. And sadly, there's too much of that. Just as there's also this very big danger in, probably not in the band world the same way, but in the orchestra world, because one, so many people are coming from diverse backgrounds in terms of their teaching. They come from certain schools of thought and they're all over the place. We're starting to see an internationalization of the sonorities of ensembles. You used to be able to tell right away which orchestra, Philadelphia, Boston, New York, whatever it was, you knew in 2 minutes which orchestra, not just because of the wind solos, because of the totality of the sound that was being created. And that's just changing throughout the world. We have these incredible, technically wonderful ensembles. You can go anywhere. I spent a lot of time now in Spain. Who would have thought 25 years ago that Spanish orchestras would all be of a really good high quality, but they are. But without this individual voice for the most part. There are a lot of reasons for this, but I find it a little distressing. So I hope that maybe more conductors will focus on how they want their orchestra to sound, the same way as we would not want Yo-Yo Ma to change the way he plays. We don't want anybody who's a significant artist. We want to be able to recognize them because of how they sound. I think it should be the same for ensembles too.
Wonderful. We're here at the end of our class period. And so I have a final question. If you had really any advice for our music students and our music educators that are here today.
Well, the educators, just do it. Believe me, there really is nothing more gratifying than producing young people who go out there as much more fully rounded people. And music can do that. Music is that one force that gets everybody together. People from these diverse backgrounds we talk about, who may have unbelievable conflicts in their lives and with each other, come together when it's about music. Try to maintain that love and passion for music. And for those of you that are borderline, do I really want a career in music or don't I want it? Have a fallback position. It may not work out in music. It's very competitive and, as I say, subjective, so we can't know where people are going to wind up. But try to think about, what else can I do that would satisfy me? What's going to make my life better? And add that to the mix. And I think then you'll be quite all right. I think you'll be satisfied that you've moved in the right direction.
Wonderful. Maestro, thank you very much for your time.
It's an honor to talk to all of you. Thank you so much.
Have you here. I'm hoping someday we can have you here on campus.
Hey,
very soon.
Like I said, I go to places that are kind of fun to do. I'll probably go visit my son at some point. keep in touch. I'll be happy to come out and work with you.
Very
for
close. Thank you
little
so
bit.
much, everyone. Thank you, Maestro.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.